Greetings, everyone. I think we're ready to get going. Our panelists are coming on board, and I want to welcome you to today's Financial Aid at CSB+SJU webinar. My name is Tom Voller-Berdan. I work in the admission office, and am really quite pleased that everything seems to have gone correctly this week. I want to apologize to anybody who tried to join last week. We certainly had a glitch in the background, and we were buzzing around like bees trying to solve it. Nevertheless, it gave us another week to be even more prepared for this presentation. As I said, today's presentation is going to focus on financial aid and the financial aid application process. Many of us on this panel today know that the process can be challenging. One, because we've worked with hundreds and thousands of families as they've gone through it. And then a number of us have actually had our own children go through the process. I can tell you from my own experience that last year, my wife, who's a director of college guidance at a high school, and I were sitting down working on the FAFSA for our daughter, who was a senior at the time. And we turned to each other and said, you know, how do people that don't have a background in admission and college guidance do this? It was complicated for us. So we know that it can be challenging. While we present today, we're going to have staff members in the background answering any questions. If you submit a more general question, we may be answering that live. If it's a more specific question, we'll answer that directly through the Q&A. And we will also be recording today's session, and that will be sent to you tomorrow sometime, early in the morning, hopefully, but watch for that to arrive. And we will also be, if there's related links or related information that we want to be sharing, we'll be putting that in the chat section. So watch for that as we go. I also know that some of our attendees provided some questions previously as you registered, and we'll be bringing those into the discussion today also. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stuart Perry, our Director of Financial Aid. And Stuart, you can go ahead and introduce the panelists.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Again, my name is Stuart Perry, and I'm Executive Director of Financial Aid for St. Ben's and St. John's. With us today are some of my colleagues. Robert Piatta, he's the Director of Financial Aid at St. John's. He and I will kind of be sharing the presentation today and going over the slides with you. Also helping us today are a couple of our financial aid counselors, Jennifer Garrids and Ann Kaluza, and they will be the ones kind of responding to questions as they come in through the Q&A on the webinar. So feel free to submit your questions there as we get toward the end and wrap up. If there's other questions that continue coming in, as Tom said, we can try to answer those live. Again, if there's later questions that remain at the end of the presentation. As Tom kind of alluded to, some of us, many of us have been through this with our own children, and as he mentioned, that we've experienced this personally, and as well as helping a lot of families through the process over the years. This year, the stars have kind of aligned a little bit, and as my twins, my children who are twins, are high school seniors. So I'm walking through the process of college search, college finance, and college decisions with you. And have we filed my children's FAFSAs? Yes, we have. And I probably did it a little quicker than average, but I had to do 2 of them. So a little financial aid karma going on there. But my kids sat next to me, and we sat down and got through it together. And I think we all learned something in the process. So again, with that, we're gonna see if we can't get our webinar going. And the first slide, we're gonna share some information about our basic merit-based scholarships. And then we're gonna move into more of the need-based financial aid. So most of it's gonna focus on applying for need-based aid, but I did wanna put a slide up that reviews or shares some information about our St. Ben's, St. John's merit scholarships. Now, most of you have probably been admitted and received both the admission letter and the initial scholarship letter. And the the packet that said hello Benny or hello Johnny, and again with the scholarship letter in there. The academic achievement scholarship listed first here is kind of our primary merit scholarship, and essentially 100% of our applicants are going to be considered for an academic achievement scholarship. And now at St. Ben's and St. John's, we purposely set the renewal requirement at an attainable level. We want families and students to be able to count on that level of funding from year to year. Also, we want students to be able to explore different academic options and outside of class activities, experiences, and take advantage of the many opportunities for, again, exploration and growth on the St. Ben's and St. John's campuses. And we want them to be able to do that without the fear of losing their scholarship that might come along with kind of having to focus on earning a certain higher GPA. So, the other scholarships listed here do have separate applications, and those are accessible through the website at the bottom of the page here. Most of them are fairly self-explanatory. I will describe the Bonner Leader a little bit. That's a community service focused program that includes a $2,500 scholarship, as well as a student employment placement in a area nonprofit serving organization, or an on-campus position that has kind of a community service based focus. Some of the off-campus sites include Big Brothers Big Sisters, United Way, and then local schools. And then on campus, some of those positions with the Bonner Leader program include the St. Ben's Community Kitchen and the St. John's Outdoor University. So again, we have some additional options, additional scholarship opportunities that your son or daughter might want to pursue, again, through the website listed here. So that's the summation of that. The alum referral scholarship mentioned here, that's $1,000. Fine arts scholarships range from $1,000 up to $6,000. The Bonner Leader I mentioned is at $2,500. And then the Women in Leadership and Women in STEM scholarships are actually $5,000 per year renewable. So, all right, so that's a summation of our merit. We're going to move on to our focusing on need-based financial aid and how to apply. It really all starts with the FSA ID and the FAFSA. Again, many of you have probably already submitted or completed your FAFSA, but if you haven't yet, it's certainly not too late to do that. I usually encourage families to set up an FSA ID as kind of the first step, and you'll do that at studentaid.gov. You're going to provide some information about the student, name, address, social security number, date of birth, and then you'll do the same thing for the parent, and you're going to create your FSA ID that way. As it says here, you'll want to make sure you use separate email addresses for student and parent. The federal government really encourages you to keep your FSA ID confidential, not share it with people. The FSA ID essentially serves a couple purposes. The main purpose is that as it's your electronic signature on the FAFSA, but also students will use their FSA ID later on as if they borrow student loans, they'll use their FSA ID to access their student loan records on the National Student Loan Data System. So the FAFSA itself, then again, many of you have probably already done it, and we're getting a lot of those FAFSAs in. But if you haven't, you'll start it at either studentaid.gov or FAFSA.gov. They both will get you there. And a couple of years ago, the federal government incorporated what they call prior years. So now families are reporting income information from 2 years ago, and that basically allows more families to get it done because the vast majority of us have our 2021 taxes already completed. We have a priority deadline, as it says here, of March 15th, and that's simply to make sure that we have a family's FAFSAs in hand and can do a financial aid package before our May 1 enrollment deadline. We obviously will continue looking at FAFSAs and sending out award letters for FAFSAs that come in after the March 15th deadline, though. This is just a quick screenshot of what the first page of the FAFSA looks like. So make sure you're not going to FAFSA.com or FAFSA.org. You're going to be visiting FAFSA.gov. That's going to be the official FAFSA website. This is another one of the initial screens you're going to come to when you are filing the FAFSA. And this is called kind of the role selection. The purpose of putting up this screen for you is when you sit down with your son or daughter to complete the FAFSA, I would suggest, and that's what I would suggest doing it with your son or daughter there, because some of the questions are going to pertain to them and some are going to pertain to the parents. And if you, again, you're doing that with your son or daughter, you want to choose the first option here, I am the student, and want to access the FAFSA. When we go out to high schools and help families with their FAFSA, what I've observed is that if the student and parent are doing it together, they usually have more luck getting through it successfully. This page from the FAFSA, again, if you've done it, might look familiar to you, but this is one of the first pages where you're going to submit some information. Some of this will be preloaded for you if you created your FSA ID. But I put up this screenshot of the FAFSA just to show you the 7 sections of the FAFSA that you'll work through. Student demographics. Along the top there, it shows student demographics, pretty self-explanatory. In the school selection, you're going to do 2 things. You're going to indicate what high school your son or daughter attends. And then the second part of the school selection step is indicating which colleges you want your FAFSA sent to. And you can list up to 10 colleges there to have your FAFSA sent to. Once you get admitted and the financial aid office at each college reviews your FAFSA, again, eventually you'll get a financial aid offer from each of those schools. Again, as I said, you can list up to 10. If you decide later in the process that you want to add an 11th or 12th school, you can log into your FAFSA. You have to take out a couple schools and then add 2 more that you want your FAFSA sent to, and then simply resubmit the FAFSA. The third section is what's called dependency status, and that's where you determine whether parent information has to be reported on the FAFSA. For most kind of traditional age college students, they're going to be dependent for FAFSA purposes, so parent information will have to be reported as well. Parent demographics would be information about the parents, obviously, name, date of birth, things like that. Then you get into the sections 5 and 6, and this is where really you're going to provide the information that determines financial aid eligibility in the parent, and both the parent and the student financials is going to be where you report your income, your taxes paid, certain types of investments and assets. One of the things that Robert's going to talk about a little bit is some FAFSA tips, but so I'll save that for him. But just be careful and make sure you read the instructions as you're going through each of the questions if you are not familiar with the FAFSA itself. And then section 7 is where you're going to sign and submit. There'll be an opportunity for you to review all the information that you submitted to make sure that it's accurate. And then you'll provide your signature via the FSA ID, and you'll click the submit button. You'll want to make sure you look for a confirmation page that will show you that the FAFSA is submitted. It'll say congratulations, and that's a sign that you've successfully submitted it. I'll also note that the parents will get an email. If you submit a parent email address, you'll get an email confirming that your child's FAFSA was submitted successfully. So part of the FAFSA involves, again, as I said, indicating what schools you want your FAFSA sent to. You can either you can either search for the colleges, or you can provide their federal school codes. And I just put St. Ben's and St. John's school codes here just for your reference. And the data retrieval tool, as it says here, is part of the FAFSA in the financial information section. And generally, we are encouraging families to use the data retrieval tool, as do the federal government. They kind of recommend that as the preferred way to get your tax information from the IRS into the FAFSA. And as it says here, if you choose data retrieval, or there's a button that says link to the IRS, you're going to take a temporary kind of detour from the FAFSA. You go out to the IRS website, you'll authenticate your information, and you can actually type in you're going to type in your address as it comes on your tax return. And that's how the IRS makes sure you are the person that you are how they authenticate your identity. And then you're going to authorize the transfer of your tax information back into the FAFSA. So that's kind of generally how that works. And as it indicates here, it does lower your chances of being selected for review in a process called verification. And we'll touch on that a little bit later too.
As Stuart said, with the IRS data retrieval, it's very important if you're able to do it, that would be awesome, because again, 80% of the families who do the data retrieval normally are not selected for the verification process because that tax information has been verified. One thing that has come up, especially I notice it a lot when I do financial aid nights, families do get a little bit discouraged sometimes because they were successful and they were able to get that data retrieval to work. The data is listed on the form, but then a couple of questions will pop up and it'll be asking about the specific dollar amount of wages for parent. And so they're sometimes confused thinking, well, why didn't that transfer as well? Well, when you're transferring the tax information from the IRS, it's taking what's on the line for the adjusted gross income. Your wages are usually on a different line and they are together. There's no way in this process that the wages are separated. It's just moving your income. So once you have transferred the data, you normally will have to look at your W-2 forms and list your individual wages onto the actual form. So just be aware if you've not filed the taxes, or I'm sorry, if you've not filed the FAFSA yet, that is something that does pop up quite a bit where people are assuming that that's going to occur and it doesn't. So just be aware of that.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, this is just a screenshot of the form that, or the FAFSA page where you link to the IRS. And I'll let Robert talk about a few more things here. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, so some of the other things to kind of keep in mind, when you read the instructions very carefully when you're filing the FAFSA, especially family size, number, and college, what they're asking is what your family size is going to be looking like for the upcoming academic year. So you want to make sure you're putting the correct number of family members. Sometimes people get caught up in this and they're listing their children that are 25 and 26 and living on their own. It's basically what's part of the family unit for this upcoming school year. Investment net worth, again, read it very, very carefully, because we have many families that when they are filing this portion of it, they give us too much information. Sometimes they're listing their entire 401 retirement funds, which is not something that necessarily has to be fully reported. So you want to make sure you're looking at the questions and you're following it. If you have questions when you're in this section and you're not sure if it's something that you should be including, you can feel free to contact our offices. We get these questions quite often. We can walk you through that process. Same thing with untaxed income. The questions, again, read it very carefully. It will tell you what to include, what not to include. But if you're not sure, just give us a call, or again, there are also through the FAFSA, there is some helplines too that you can call somebody on their 1-800 number. They can also assist as well. But we are usually available at both offices. So if you have questions on this, feel free to let us know. So basically, after, these are just some tips on some of the stuff that you're going to be completing. Once you get through the parent section, they're going to ask similar questions of the student. Again, your student's investment net worth, their untaxed income, that type of information. Once you have submitted all of this data, and you have actually hit the submit button and you put our school codes down, normally within about 2 to 3 working days, we are going to be receiving the FAFSAs. So they come in, because of the school codes that you chose, all students that listed the College of St. Benedict, those will go into the office that Stuart works at. All the ones for St. John's will come into the office that I work at. We have different staffs that work on both the Bennies and the Johnny applicants, so we would be reviewing those. And so kind of a timeline, our first batch of award letters will probably be going out sometime in mid-December. So if we have your FAFSA data, everything looked clean, we didn't need anything further, that's when you could potentially expect to receive an award notification. Unless your son or daughter has also indicated that they're looking at some of the different scholarships that had a January 15th deadline that Stuart mentioned earlier, we might be holding off on sending out your award notification until we have that data. But just kind of keep that in mind. Once we start the awarding process, we start sending them out pretty regularly on a weekly basis from the time that they're ready to begin. So just so you kind of have an idea on that. The verification process, Stuart alluded to this slightly a little bit when we got to this information earlier. Again, a certain percentage of our students are selected for verification. It does not mean you did anything incorrectly. It just means the government selected your application. If that occurred and we need something further, we email the family, the student and the parent, and we tell them what information we still need for the file to be complete. In most cases, it could be a copy of the tax return if you weren't able to do the data retrieval, or it's a verification worksheet, which would be verifying your family size, number in college, and a few other asset data that they want us to verify. If that occurs, you will receive an email from us. Try to respond to them as quickly as possible. We normally do not send full financial aid awards until all verification is completed. And so that's kind of the verification process. Some of our families, when they're looking at the FAFSA data, they're looking at this and they're asking about 2021. And that was not what our current situation is. We are in a different world than what our taxes state. The FAFSA wants your 2021 information. So you're going to submit the 2021 data. If you have a special circumstance, then we have a form that you can use. And on that form, you would specifically list the different things that that could be reviewed. Some of the top ones: loss of income, high medical or dental. You have other children that would be in parochial school that you're paying tuition on. Those are probably our three main ones that we have, that families have had a change or a loss. And you can submit, so you're going to submit the FAFSA based on your 2021 data, then you're going to supply the special circumstance form with the other information that we are requiring. We're going to review all of that. If we have questions when you submit the information, someone from our staff who's reviewing it will reach out if we need something further from you. But the special circumstance form is something that some families will use because, again, the FAFSA is not, at this point, maybe a true indicator of where the family really is. In the question and answers, you should also see a link for our special circumstance form. So if you have that, make sure you write that down and get into our link and go ahead and get that completed.
Thanks, Robert. This next slide just shows shows our charges, our standard charges for this upcoming academic year. Tuition is obviously the largest component. There are 3 standard fees that we charge students, and health center technology fee and a student life fee. I think St. John's actually has a fee for the dome as well. So most schools have some types of fees like this. We try to obviously keep them at a minimum. And then housing and food for living on campus is the 3rd component here. The textbooks that students have to buy are obviously going to vary from student to student, depending on their major, depending on how many textbooks they might be able to buy used. We do have, I think, now some textbooks that you can rent as well. So there's some options there that students can take advantage of to try to keep that textbook cost down. We estimate about $500 per semester. Then I did want to also put up a kind of a financial aid package example, or an award example here, whereby we, when we send out the financial aid letter, as Robert mentioned, starting around mid-November, this is what that letter will contain then, is the different components and types of financial aid that we can extend to a student, again, based on our review of their FAFSA. So we'll put the academic achievement scholarship on there and any other merit scholarships that you are offered. And then if you qualify for some St. Ben's or St. John's need-based grant, and this is just an example where we offered someone $5,000, and then the federal student loan, it will be a component of any aid package, because the FAFSA, by doing the FAFSA, you're essentially applying for all types of need-based aid, including loans. Now, our student loan component is kind of a standard amount. The federal government limits how much students can borrow year to year, and $5,500 is the limit for a first-year student. We hear from families a lot about borrowing, and there's varying opinions on borrowing. And what I would say about borrowing specifically is that it gets to be really like an investment in yourself, if you will. You've probably heard this before, but it really is a time when students are looking at spending their money on an education that launches them into bigger and better things. Student loans, again, for better or worse, are a way that they accomplish that and obtain that certificate or the degrees and the qualifications for life after college. Our students, St. Ben, St. John's grads, are largely successful in repaying their loans as measured by our federal cohort default rate. Every school in the nation has a federal loan cohort default rate. St. Ben's and St. John's are at 1% or less than 1%. So the vast majority of our students get qualifications and that from St. Ben's and St. John's and go on to jobs and careers that enable them to repay their loans. Then again, by applying for need-based aid, we're going to essentially guarantee a student employment opportunity for students, and that will be typically part of the award as well. This says $3,600 in the employment, but it actually is going to be $4,000 for next year. And we encourage students to make use of the student employment component. Like a lot of organizations right now, we are trying to fill jobs still yet for the current academic year. So if your son or daughter really wants to work, there's going to be an opportunity for them to do that. Students work in campus offices, ranging from the library to the president's office, dining and food service, grounds crew, library. You know, they're working with teachers in laboratories. So they're doing a very wide variety of jobs. And again, picking up some job skills along the way that they can talk about after they graduate. So I mentioned here a little bit more about student employment. I mentioned it is a $4,000 work award for this coming year. And that does require about 10 to 12 hours per week through the academic year. We're paying a base wage right now of $12 an hour. We haven't set our wage rate for next year yet, but it'll be at least $12 an hour. When a student works, they can apply their earnings to their tuition charges or their student account, as we call it, or they can apply their earnings to a bank account, checking or savings account. And they're going to fill that paperwork out with us when they come in for orientation. And they can change that as they go along. A lot of students will have their earnings go to their tuition bill during the academic year, and then maybe they stay and work with us for the summer and they switch it over to their checking account. So that can change over time as well. Students who are offered work study will get more instructions. If they enroll, they'll get more instructions about how to find a job on campus, how to apply during the summer months from our student employment colleagues.
On the federal loans, this is a screen just basically talking, again, Stuart basically has already stated freshmen can borrow up to $5,500. Sometimes what will happen with your students, just so you're aware, when we're awarding your students as entering freshmen, we're going to offer them $5,500. Some of your students are coming in with PSEO credits, other things like that, where they may already have 15 to 20 credits after once they've already enrolled. So after one semester, they could have more than 28 total credits, which would make them a sophomore. So during the second semester, they may be eligible for an additional $1,000 of federal loan money. So that's something just to kind of keep an eye on. We don't automatically look at all of our freshmen and go, oh, wait, this student now can get some additional funds. But be aware that if your student is bringing in 10 to 15 credits and then they complete 15 or 16 during their first semester, they're going to have more than 28 credits, which is what changes a student from a freshman to a sophomore. So by contacting our office, they can get some additional money. Just a little tip for you, because again, many of our students are bringing in credits from PSEO or those type of things. So just be aware of it. The interest rate on the federal loans is usually established in June of every year. We do not have the rates for the 23-24 year yet. Currently, they are at 4.99%. So basically what will occur is if your son or daughter is coming to St. Ben's or St. John's, in early June, they're going to receive an email notification from our loan specialist, Emily Mosloff, and it's basically going to tell them the steps of what they need to do to accept the loans and give them the link, which is studentaid.gov, to complete the master promissory note and the entrance counseling, which is required for all first-time borrowers. Once they've completed this master promissory note and entrance counseling, they will not need to do it their sophomore, junior, or senior year. For those years, as they progress, they'll receive an award notification. The loan will be on their awarding on the awarding screen for them, and all they have to do is accept or decline it. They won't have to do the paperwork for the master prom note and entrance counseling. They are required to do that because they have not borrowed before. And so the government requires that for all students. So just be aware that that's something that they're going to do. They will get reminded beginning in June, about every 2 to 3 weeks. We will send emails to them if they have not completed it. We will continue doing that through the summer into the school year if they have not actually gone into the system and either accepted or declined. Some of our families, after the original financial aid award has been offered, they still may need some additional funding. There are options in what's called the Federal Parent Plus loan and private educational loans. A Federal Parent Plus loan is a loan that is in the parent name for the student. So you are the borrower as the parent for this particular loan. The interest rate, again, won't be established until early June. Currently, it's 7.54% for the 22-23 academic year. Be aware also with the Parent Plus loan, there's around a 4.5% origination fee that the government takes out of the amount that you are borrowing. So sometimes if you need a specific amount and you're not factoring that in, you may come up a little short, so be aware. There are also private educational loans. Private educational loans are loans that are normally the student is the borrower, the parent is the co-signer. As you can see listed below, there are Sallie Mae, Discover, Minnesota Self Loan are some of the lenders that we have on our preferred lender list. We have a preferred lender list on the St. Ben St. John's website that kind of walks you through that process. What's nice about it is you don't have to contact any of these lenders. The lenders are listed. There's an apply button next to each lender. So if you decide you like one of these lenders, you hit the apply button. It takes you to their website. You make application. That's how we become aware that your son or daughter is interested in that particular loan. We usually tell families with the private educational loans, you might want to wait a little bit before you borrow it. Kind of in some cases, sometimes wait until the first bill comes out even, because they only take about 2 to 3 weeks to process. And you really only want to borrow Parent Plus or private education loans after everything else has been exhausted. You know, is your son or daughter working in the summer? Did they receive any outside scholarships from their high school, along with the financial aid they're awarded? And then borrow what you need to borrow. But again, these options are available to you. And again, most of the questions we get in the summer as a financial aid staff have to do with the Parent Plus loans, private education loans, or parents, you know, they may have heard a presentation or something 3 or 4 months prior, and now it's time to do it. And they're like, okay, what do I do? We'll walk you through that process. So just be aware of that.
Thanks, Robert. I don't know, Robert may have mentioned this, but just want to make sure that with the Parent Plus loan, there is a credit check done on the parent borrower. And with the private education loans, as Robert mentioned, there's a cosigner required. There'd be a credit check done on the cosigner. The website where we list these loan options is, again, it's accessible through the financial aid page. And again, the fixed and variable rates are something that we talk to parents a lot about. Do we choose a fixed rate or a variable rate? We can't really tell you one way or the other. The majority of first-year students who are using a private loan likely are using selecting the fixed rate. It gives you a little bit of assurance as to what that rate's going to be through the life of that loan. Whatever amount you borrow, the only other point I make about these loans, whatever amount you borrow under the PLUS or the private education loan would be split in half. So usually I would suggest doing the math for the year as a whole, then borrow what you need for the year as a whole, and then half will come for fall and half will come for spring. All right, we're gonna move on. I think this is gonna be one of our last slides, I believe. Just a little bit of information about outside scholarships, and I'll let Robert weigh in as well. But generally speaking, we initially point students to their high school counselor's office or guidance office. A lot of organizations in your communities who provide these types of scholarships are going to let the counselors know that they exist and how to apply. We do get notified of outside scholarship programs as well. So on our admission page, under the scholarships, we do have a list of those programs, and that's at that website that's listed here. Sometimes we'll get, this is less common I think now, but sometimes we'll still get some families saying, I've been offered a scholarship search, but they want me to pay $100 or $50 for it. Generally, I would suggest not paying for a scholarship search, because I think that in general, it doesn't get you much more than you can get doing it on your own.
And one of the things too that I have found from the paying for the scholarship search is they try to link, what they'll say is they'll guarantee you that you're going to get something from the search. And what they're guaranteeing is it could be a federal loan, which you applied through the FAFSA. And so they're still telling you that you could be awarded something, but in an indirect way, it's not what you were looking for. I mean, the FAFSA is a free application. So be really careful about these pay for scholarships. A high percentage of our students, I would say over 80% of them as well, who get outside scholarships are getting them from their hometown, from their home state. So any organizations you belong to, Knights of Columbus or Lions or Eagles Club, parent employer, these are the organizations where we're getting a lot of outside scholarships from. So be aware, if you work for a large employer like a Medtronic or a Mayo or something like that, they have these scholarship programs available for their employees' dependents. So again, the high school counselor's office is probably, for most students, is the best guide. They have a good idea of scholarships in that area where students from that school are normally going to be very lucky about receiving something or at least getting information about it. So be aware of that.
Yes. What we observe too is scholarships come in all sizes. There are some scholarships that are small, like 250, and then there's scholarships that are larger from these outside organizations. And typically they are oftentimes I should say, they are just for the first year. So you want to budget that in. If it's renewable, great, but a lot of them are one time only. And so you want to, again, plan for that accordingly in your budgeting.
And one other note just on the outside scholarships as well is make sure if your son or daughter does receive an outside scholarship that you follow the guidelines as to when this organization is going to submit the funds to the school. Sometimes they will wait until the student has actually completed a semester and has a grade point average above a 2.0 before they'll submit the funds to the school. So make sure you're aware of any of the guidelines to get those funds, because it's really nice to get the award, but then sometimes it's like, okay, now how do I get that money to the school? So just make sure your son or daughter or you as a family are aware of how that goes about.
As Robert mentioned earlier, we are available to answer questions that families have about whether it's filing a FAFSA, whether it's questions about what information was presented. whether it's, as he alluded to, some families will have situations where their 2021 income was not typical and maybe it was higher than normal. That's a potential reason that you might fill out special circumstances form. As Robert indicated, there's 2 or 3 main reasons we see those, and if you're not sure, you can let us know. There are some situations that really aren't special circumstances. We usually look for situations that are unusual and unexpected. Having 1,000 or 2,000 medical expenses out of pocket typically is kind of common, so that wouldn't usually trigger a special circumstances situation. But if you had 10, 15,000 in medical out of pocket, maybe that would. Our contact information is provided here in a website, so feel free to reach out to us. I see Robert's phone number here is missing a 363, so Robert's phone number is 320-363-3664. I don't know if there are any unanswered questions in the Q&A. Let's see. Actually, I might see a couple here that we can answer. So one question was, what does 401 not necessarily needed mean? Oh, I think that was Robert was alluding to what investments, assets are not counted or not to be reported on the FAFSA, and he may have said 401, but as a 401k, a 403b,
Right.
what you've saved in a retirement account does not get counted or reported on the FAFSA in the investment net worth question. Neither does your home equity. Unless you have a second home, it would, but the home you live in does not get reported on the FAFSA.
So a cabin or rental property would, but not your primary residence.
Yeah. So again, in general, retirement savings, don't put them on the FAFSA. Sometimes, again, as Robert said too, we will see that on the FAFSA. And if we see a higher than a typical number, we might reach out to the family to ask them to verify. There's a question, my son is part of the Army National Guard. How do we include his scholarship for this? Well, we see a number of different military chapter benefits come through. And so it really depends on what chapter it was, what requirements are on it. Again, it might be something that you want to have a conversation with us, but basically, if he's eligible for VA military benefits, then you'll want to work with the Army to make sure that they get eventually submitted to the St. Ben's or St. John's, depending on which school they're at.
Usually there will be some paperwork that you will have from, let's say, the Guard that you can provide to the school so that we can assist in getting those funds to your son or daughter.
I see there's a question, I think Jennifer is responding about what if you have submitted information in the FAFSA, and I don't think we mentioned that. You can correct the FAFSA. If you know you reported your retirement assets in the FAFSA, you can go back in, log into the FAFSA and correct it. There's a means to do that. You would click on, I think it's just FAFSA corrections, and then you would log back in, navigate to the question that you need to correct and put in the right answer, the correct answer. You will need to resubmit that FAFSA if you make corrections. Robert, I'm sorry, Tom, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in right now. If we want to give folks another 30 seconds or so to submit any questions, we can do that, I guess.
Yeah, and we're readily available for questions. This is part of the discussion, so it's an ongoing discussion. If you're like Stuart and me and my wife and others around here, the questions don't get answered in one day. It's an ongoing process. So, with that, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today and actually, in asking all those really good questions. I think many of the questions that you ask are the questions that a lot of others attending probably have. So that's always really helpful. Obviously, we would really love to have your sons and daughters join our community. But equally important, we want to make sure that you and your sons and daughters are making a really good, informed decision. This is a big life decision for your your kids. And we want to make sure that they get to be a sophomore or junior and are extremely happy with their college choice. And we want to make sure they get to 40 or 50 years old and are extremely happy with their choice. So we're here to sell you on St. Ben's and St. John's, but also help you make a really good informed decision. There's lots of ways to get information from us. You can always connect directly with your admission counselor or with financial aid. We're readily available via email, phone, or Zoom. We have a lot of opportunities to visit campus. In fact, tomorrow night we have a theater day, a theater event around our theater production. So if it's not too late and you're interested in theater, come on up. And then on Saturday morning, we have a STEM and Health Sciences Day event. So you can register for that online also. And of course, we are readily available to take individual visits or individual Zoom meetings. We can connect you with anybody on campus. If you want to connect with faculty, staff, coaches, we're here to help with that. So with that in mind, I really, again, want to thank everybody for coming, and best of luck to you as you go through this process. Thank you, everyone.